Hi everyone, I'm Chris Mars. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Thanks for passing by. Now today I've got a great interview with Steve Anderson, who's one of the UK's top record producers. So today we will be talking about music, about the 80s, about synthesizers, recording techniques and all sorts of things to do with music and about his career. So enjoy and leave your comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more fabulous interviews. Thanks a lot and take care. Hi Steve, thanks for joining me today on my YouTube channel. It's really nice of you to pass by and have this little chat about music.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, really looking forward to it. It's we have a lot of chats about music on the phone, so let's do it, this way instead. It's good.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, Steve, I just want to ask you a few questions about your career because you've got a stellar lineup of artists that you've worked with. I mean, seriously stellar. I'm going to start off with a question. Basically, where and when did your musical journey start?
It started very much when I was a kid. I learned how to play keyboards by ear. My mum and dad bought me a little keyboard, and we had some neighbours that had a piano, and I was able to go around and play stuff. And I just sort of taught myself from the radio. Really, I didn't really realise how I was doing it, but I was just picking stuff up. So I'd hear a track and I'd sort of go and have a listen to it and think, how do they do that? And back in those days it was recording stuff off the radio onto cassettes, so you'd listen
Remember
to
those
the
days?
yeah. So you'd record the thing you liked, and then you'd play it, and then if it was got to a particularly tricky bit, you just have to keep rewinding it until you figured out what the chords were. And a lot of this stuff for me was very much people like Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin. So, I didn't start with the easy chords. I started pretty much with the hard ones. And from there, I just carried on playing, really. And all the way through school, I was playing, keyboards, piano, interested in production, did a bit of DJing, which enabled me to meet a friend of mine. We started doing some remixing and sent in various cassettes of remixes that we'd just done at home on really, really simple equipment. Got picked up by a company called Disco Mix Club, run by Tony Prince, who's a pretty legendary DJ. And cut a long story short, after a few years of back and forth and sending stuff to them, he offered me a job in his studio as a T-boy. I had quite a good job at the time, but I gave it up and took a massive pay cut and ended up being in these studios where they remixed a lot of big tracks for DJs. But what that meant was they were able to get then the original multi-tracks, which, in today's money is stems. So we were having all these multi-tracks come through the building from everybody, from, Nile Rodgers, Michael Jackson, Jam and Lewis, Trevor Horn. And I would sit there and be like a kid in a candy shop and put up these multi-tracks and just keep, turning the phasers up to see how they were made. And that's where I kind of learned how records were made.
Right. That's amazing, because you must have come across some incredible master tapes in those days.
Unbelievable master tapes. And also it was a real education in that you found some, like Trevor Horn's multi-tracks, you literally push the faders up and it's the record, because he prints everything pretty much. If he gets the sound, he prints it. But then there are others like the Jam and Lewis multi-tracks that the sounds were all there, but it didn't sound anything like the record. And you realized what the mix engineer, brought to it. So, on a Jam and Lewis multi-track, those amazing kicks and snares that were on the record, on the multi-track are just lins, just a lin snare. But that massive, expansive snare sound on the Jam and Lewis record was all down to Steve Hodge and his reverbs and everything that he put on it. So that was quite fascinating to hear the different ways in which different producers recorded onto the multi-tracks, and some of them committed and some of them just left it open for the mix engineer.
How do you think it's changed then with present day recording techniques? Obviously, the tape and digital are two completely different formats, but do you think there's been a drastic change in the recording method, or do you think there's still that DNA, or has it changed so much now that because it's so easy to make records these days, so to speak? to actually put together a track. But before we had 4 tracks, and I used to record on 4 tracks with my songwriting partner in the very room, actually, on a little TIAC, but obviously when you had tape and you had a limited amount of tracks, then you were very precious about them. But how do you think that's changed?
I think there was a lot of creativity within limitations. I feel that
I feel that too. Yeah.
I feel very lucky that I learnt how to make records with limitation of, say, 24 tracks, 48 tracks, whatever it was. But I like making decisions in the room, and I think it's much too easy now to record 20 takes of the bass and 20 takes of the guitar and just record and sort it all out later. I'm a bit of an old school producer, and I like to kind of get the thing in the room and commit to it. Yeah. Similarly with vocals, the different singers work different ways, but I like to get a performance. And having multiple tracks is it's fantastic for doing. I make reasonably big records, so I couldn't make them in a small way. But I feel that with having 150 vocal tracks to comp from is my idea of hell. I like to just get it down and get something comped. You can always comp into it, and I love having limitless tracks for doing things like backing vocals and tracking stuff up. That's great, but that was my only concern about what you can do now. It's brilliant that anyone can make a record, but limitless tracks does for me just make people stop making decisions. And I love that moment, and you'll know it as well, in a studio when someone does something amazing and everyone goes, "Oh, that's great." Yeah. And then, so I think, well, if it's great, it's probably not going to get any better. So let's just commit to it and say, that's it.
Yeah, I totally agree, actually. I mean, when I'm recording my songs, I try and, I can go on forever recording vocal tracks and keyboard tracks and pianos and all this sort of stuff. But I find if you just get it so that you're happy with it and just move on, otherwise you can just keep going back forever.
Really I agree. And I think the one thing that I learned from all those guys was about sounds. It's so important, the sounds that you use in the first place. It's so important to get the right sounds when you're recording, not just put something down that's kind of all right and then expect the mix engineer to sort it out, or have 11 different snares and which could be mixed in any different way, but just it all just sounds good. I think I'm a bit of a kind of stickler for trying to get the right sound to sit in the track when you're recording, rather than just leave it up to some mix engineer to sort out.
Sure, yeah. And I'm doing some library work at the moment, library music, which I think you've heard some of the showreel I sent you. A lot of those electronic pieces of music. I mean, I've got thousands, tens of thousands of sounds like we all have. Plug-in presets. Of course, we can change the presets, but personally, I find just find a sound that you're happy with and then just use it.
Yeah.
Because you can sit there forever just going, oh, that sounds better. That sounds good. That's got a nice stereo effect on it. That's got a nice width to it. That's got a good bass or whatever. But if you're happy with one sound, I think just do it, get it down and then move on. And then you can close that project and move on to the next.
Yeah, and I think it's great to be inspired by sounds. I think it's wonderful, to get a new synth or to get a new thing and you put your hand on it and go, oh wow, that inspires me to do this, or and in the same way as it's great to get some old analog synth and do something interesting with that. So I wouldn't say I'm lazy with it. I always go back to this Quincy Jones quote, which I heard him say when I saw him do a talk, and Quincy Jones says that the definition of a record producer is someone who can hear the finished thing in their head when they hear the song, and then they've just got to figure out how to go about making it. Right. So 9 times out, if I hear a song or someone's plays, a lot of what I do a lot of reinvention. So people will play a song and go, can you imagine this in a different style? So if I've kind of almost imagined the finished thing in my head, I know the sounds that I need to go and make it. And I'm a huge fan of mixing organic sounds with electronic sounds as well, which comes from my love of people like Trevor Horn, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, I see. Trevor Horn is actually one of my favorite producers. I mean, I just love that sound he had was phenomenal.
Yeah.
That work with Fairlight
Yeah, when the Fairlight used to cost the same as a house at some
Yeah.
point. I mean, I'd only I never worked with him. I worked around him. I worked at his studio at Psalm West for a long time in the 90s. And I was lucky enough to have a few sort of chats down by the water cooler with him and stuff. But yeah, that was post the Fairlight time. But yeah, I mean, he was, he just strives for perfection. And he's a very, very good arranger as well. But he arranges in such an interesting way whereby he'll just get a whole bunch of people in a room and just get them to do their thing, and then he'll just pick the bits he likes. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a very distinctive sound. If you hear a record that's been produced by him, you can tell that it was a treble horn arrangement. What would you say is your sound?
Oh, it's a tricky one because I do so much stuff. I think probably the archetypal one is this kind of what I tend to call widescreen, which is just this slightly kind of widescreen, or it's sort of emotional. So it can be small, but it can still, I like to evoke a feeling and emotion within the listener. And I do have been lucky enough for my whole career to work with orchestras and strings, and they'll normally crop up on something. It can be in a small way or a massive way. But most of the records I've been producing, probably in the last 5 years, have all been have had some semblance of an orchestra on them, but mixed with programming and electronics as well.
Right. I mean, out of some of the artists that you've worked with, I've just got a list of a few of them here, which I'll just mention so that people watching who don't know who you've worked with, they will know by the end of this interview.
Okay, well, it's good to remind me as well, because I forget.
Yeah. Well, there's a young unknown lady called Kylie Minogue.
Yes.
Who you've written several hit songs for, apparently.
Yeah.
And there's Louise Redknapp and Luke Evans, Westlife, Claire Richards, Steps, Leona Lewis.
Yes.
And you worked with Suzanne Boyle. You did some stuff with Take That, Atomic Kitten, Level 42, Lulu and the Patriot Boys. That's a very impressive roster there, I must say. And of course, I hope that you're going to add me to that.
Yeah, no, I will. I definitely will. And also, please remember that has been over. I was lucky enough to starting, that job I had when I went to DMC. I was 20 years old. So, right. That's, over 30 years ago. So a lot of those things have happened within 30 years of, some of them have been, so I've been working with Kylie for probably 22 years, probably more than that actually now, in different ways. But I was, I was incredibly lucky with DMC because the first artist I worked with was on a remix that I did. And it was a friend of Tony Prince, the DJ who ran Disco Mix Club, and a friend of his wanted to have a remix of one of his forthcoming songs or something from his forthcoming album, but he wanted a young remixer to remix it, but he wanted it to be done at his studio for him to kind of be around the process and also for him to be involved in it as a collaboration. Right. So at the age of 21, I found myself getting in my car, driving to Paul McCartney's studio and spending a week with Paul McCartney remixing one of his songs. And that's the first artist I'd ever worked with in my life. So that's what I'm saying. It's a very lucky, fortuitous thing where you get to the first famous person you meet is pretty much the ultimate famous person you're ever going to meet. Yeah. And it puts you at ease working with other pop stars, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it also shows how a lot of famous people like Paul McCartney, who are so well known, are also so down to earth and are happy to work with all sorts of people. They don't have their own little clique of people that they just want to stick with.
Well, I think it was a very different thing that he was doing. I mean, obviously he was making his record and he'd made it, but he just had this idea. It was in the sort of 90s, so it was that time where everyone was having remixes done, and he had the idea of wanting to have a Paul McCartney record that was played in all these cool clubs in Ibiza that no one knew was Paul McCartney, yet he was all over it. Right. He played on it, he sang on it, but we kind of disguised it in such a way. So he knows how to do everything, but he didn't know how to do this. And I feel that for me, it was a great experience, not only because it's Paul McCartney. I mean, wow. But not only that, it was just realizing that someone so incredibly famous could be so incredibly kind and lovely. It kind of set me up for understanding what I felt people in his position should behave like, and why it's kind of rare that I tolerate people that don't necessarily behave in a nice way these days.
Right.
Because there's no reason, if he can be lovely and he's probably the biggest star in the world, why shouldn't everyone else?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, there are some people that shall remain nameless, I think.
It's fine. That's fine. It's, I've been lucky enough to avoid most of them.
Yeah. I think that's part of life, though, isn't it? It's trying to avoid the people that you don't really want to come across. That's part.
It's got to be fun. We're not heart surgeons. We're not saving lives. It's got to be fun.
Exactly. How did the working with Kylie come about?
I was still working at that same studio, Disco Mix Club, and I had formed a remix partnership with a friend of mine called Dave Seaman, who was a DJ, and the remix partnership was called Brothers in Rhythm. And we had remixed one Kylie song that she had released on PWL, so the Stock Aitken and Waterman years, and we were one of the few people that were allowed to remix one of her songs, actually, because PWL did everything in house, and they were genius and brilliant, and I'm the biggest fans of everything they've done. And she then left that label and signed to a very small label called Deconstruction, which was run by a couple of friends of ours, and they'd had a couple of big hits with these kind of Italian records like Black Box, Ride on Time. That was Deconstruction. And they were just these two northern guys who found themselves, kings of the world. And it was a very cool thing for her to sign to them, because it was a very kind of dance label. But we were very fortunate in the fact that Keith Blackhurst, who ran the label, was also a friend of ours, and we'd done some remixes for him. So genuinely, my partner Dave called Keith and said, "Oh, I heard you signed Kylie. We'd love to try and do something." And he said, "Great, I'll send her down next week." And there she was the following week in our studio writing songs. So we literally asked. That's how I got to work with Kylie.
If you don't ask, you don't get in this business, really.
Well, and they could have easily said no. And also what we did could have easily been terrible, but it worked out pretty well. And we ended up producing and writing a large amount of that first album, including Confide in Me, which was one of the singles from it. And then that started, that was 1994, I think. And that just started my collaboration with her over the years in various different guises, from producer to writer to musical director for her tours, which I started in 98.
How did that how did that work? Because you were obviously doing a lot of studio work, and then going from the studio to the live production format. How was that transition for you?
It was
it a learning curve, or was it something that?
Oh no, completely a learning curve. No, it was. I'd always loved shows, and I always loved to want to get involved with shows. We'd done a couple of things. I'd done a few things for her, a few one-offs, and we did the legendary Sydney Mardi Gras after party 1 year, which I put together for her. But it was really fortuitous, because the second Deconstruction album that I worked on, which was called Impossible Princess, did really well in Australia, but didn't do so well everywhere else. And there was an opportunity for her to go back to Australia to do a few small shows, theatre shows. And she just asked if I would go over and MD it and look after it. We were given an incredible band. It was actually John Farnham's band at the time, who are unbelievable musicians. I took a couple of my English blokes over with me, one sort of a guy called James Mack, who then was doing incredible things with electronics that no one really was doing around then, and a really kind of cool indie guitarist called Carl Mann. And we went over, and because it was small shows and the record hadn't done as well, I got to kind of learn from scratch how to put together a theatre show for that. And then as that went really well, thankfully. And from then on, I stayed in the position of doing the musical direction. I was always very clear about the fact that I would arrange it, I would rehearse it, I would put it together, but I wouldn't be on stage. I'm just not a natural performer. It's not something that I'm comfortable. I've never wanted to be.
Were you ever in a band?
No. Well, I probably at school I was, but I didn't. No, I never wanted to be. I never want to be on a stage. I've always loved the behind the scenes thing. I always loved putting it together. And as you say, I'm a record producer as well. So I don't really want to spend 6 months of my life kind of going out playing gigs when I could then be going and doing something else. So it was so fortunate, and I was so lucky that I got to learn how to put together a theatre show. And then it got a bit bigger, and then I knew how to put together an arena show, and then a bigger arena show. And then before I knew it, we were doing the opening ceremony to the Sydney Olympics. So it was a stadium show. So
incredible.
It was just really fortuitous that it was, I learned from small, the bottom show upwards. So yeah, that was very lucky.
What would you say, without stating the obvious, but what is the difference between a gig like, for example, a few hundred people going to a stadium gig, going from one to the other? I mean, what did you have to do to accommodate that capacity?
It's mainly production that's around it. And I mean, say for instance, the shows that we did for a concert called Intimate and Live in Australia, which was the first one that I worked on, it had a 7-piece band and 2 dancers and a couple of bits of set, and that was about it. It was as simple as you could possibly get. And then what then happens is you go up a bit more. So if you get to an arena show, there's more dancers, there's more production, especially the shows that I work on with people like Kylie and Westlife and Steps. They are big production shows. They have sections, they have sets, they have video, lighting, choreography, all the stuff, that's similar to what you work with all the time as well. So the only thing is that the departments get bigger, and, you then incorporate segues. And then there are things where you have an artist like Kylie that's got the biggest, brilliant back catalogue. But you need to sometimes rework the songs from the back catalogue into the sound of the new album. Effectively, that's all that changes. My job doesn't really change because I'm still looking at 22 songs that need to be put into a show that work for an audience. And also, I'm a bit of a stickler for what I call the arc of the show. I like it to feel like a journey, basically. Right. So there's usually some kind of narrative in there from the creative director, and I'm working a lot with creative director, artist, choreographer, video, lighting, to make sure that what I'm doing fits in with the brief of what they need.
Right. And actually, a couple of years ago, I was at Olympia. There was an exhibition for stage equipment, lighting, lasers. Maybe you've been to one of those before.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal what is coming out now. The new technology for television, stage, theatre now is mind-bending with the new types of effects that are available. It seems to just get better and better and better. I mean,
it's incredible. I mean, we're so lucky on all of our shows to work with a great creative team. But I mean, we ran the last Kylie tour we did was a tour called Golden. We always run a silent stage. So, there's never any amps. There's never any, in fact, for that last show, everything was all done on Kempers, which was all which was all MIDI preset. So the guitarist could be down the front playing a rhythm guitar, going to a solo, going back to a rhythm guitar. It was all switching. It was all done. We did the same for Glastonbury. Dancers all had little bits in their hair where there was so spotlights could track them. It's incredible what can be done. And as with everything, technology is amazing, but it's about who's in charge of that technology. And I've been so lucky to work with some incredible creative directors that have made that all that technology work to its absolute best, including one tour we did with Kylie with a director called William Baker, where it was a water show. Basically, there was about 20 fountains and a swimming pool, and we toured it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
Do you think though that because there's so much amazing technology around now, that audiences are getting used to it more and more, that it can be, well, if you put on a show that doesn't have anything like that, they're going to expect it.
I think everything that you do, every show has to have heart, and I think no matter whatever you throw at the stage, the only reason those people are there is for the person that's on the ticket.
Yeah,
that's nice. Absolutely. That we can add all this stuff, but you could, we could throw all the same stuff that we would do at a Kylie show to another artist that isn't as good as Kylie, and it would fall flat. So she's all of the, she's the best special effect that you could ever get.
Oh,
so and I think and other people as well that I work with, but we would do, for instance, we did a show a few years ago, a tiny show of Kylie doing B-sides and album tracks, and there was no frills, there was no nothing, it was her and a band, and that had as much magic as much magic going for it as the massive arena show, because the love was in the room. So I think as long as you get audience connectivity, the rest of it's fun. I mean, we love doing that stuff, don't get me wrong. But at the same point, we did a Christmas show at the Albert Hall with her, and it was her on stage with an orchestra, and there weren't any gags, and it was probably the best concert I've ever been to.
Right. I find, some of the gigs that I do, the small venues and solo events that I do, playing cover songs, you can bring people. There's so much emotion within classic songs that you can bring people to tears, probably by my singing.
No, not at all. And also, what's great is for you, Chris, is that you've done this for such a long time that you know what songs are going to resonate with an audience.
Yeah,
and you know what's going to do it. And if you have that power to connect, by singing a song and an audience, someone in an audience gets affected. I mean, I'm always, as much as we put these things together and we rehearse them to within an inch of their life before night one, I'm still don't know until night one. Most people, if they see me at a show on night one, I'm not looking at the stage, I'm looking at the audience. Because I put in hit points. I've got, you probably work the same. I put in things that I think are going to work. And then sometimes I'll do something and it won't work. And then sometimes something that I've never thought was going to get a reaction does. And the audience is king in all of this stuff. So, that's who we do it for. And the way that, you're saying with the songs, just having a connection. If you're looking out and there's someone either having the time of their life or crying their eyes out because what you're doing is affecting them, you're doing your job properly.
I think that's why we do this subconsciously. It's to have that effect on people. There's no better feeling in the world than to have someone really appreciate what you're doing and to change their life in some aspect, because you're reminding them of special emotions, of special times in their lives, and it's such a powerful emotion, which is also very much used to help treat dementia patients.
Yes. No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that wonderful Vicky McClure TV show that was on about the dementia choir I thought was fantastic, and showed the power of music in what can be done, and it's incredible.
It really is incredible, and I think we're, as musicians, we're especially now during lockdown, or slowly coming out of it, hopefully. But I think people have realised how important music really is, and how effective they are by its absence. More to the point, by not having it there, you miss it. It's put headphones on or whatever, listen to your stereo. That's one thing, but live music and getting that actual resonance from the instruments, from those speakers, getting that vibration from the air to your ears in a club, in a venue, in a stadium, wherever it may be, you can't reproduce that sitting with a pair of headphones on.
No, you can't. And also, I think nostalgia plays a huge part. I think, I do a couple of shows where, nearly all my shows have got, older songs in it, but, someone, you never know that song that you're playing, we do a big show with a few shows with an orchestra and kind of do dance classics, and you look out and all of a sudden you see this reaction. There's probably a 44-year-old couple who probably met on the beach at Koh Samui in Ibiza 22 years ago when this record was playing, and they were probably off their face and having the time of their life. And now they're respectable adults with a couple of kids. But all of a sudden that thing hits you, that moment hits you, and you're hit by remembering exactly where you were when you first heard that song.
Yes,
and the power of that, the power of the soundtrack of people's lives is incredibly important, I think.
It is. It's so powerful. I mean, I get it often. So many songs that I just want to be transported back to a certain time, and you just put it on, and it's like, oh wow, that song just the spot. For
and everyone has that. Everyone has it. The real classics are the one. There's that golden age between, I don't know, when people are sort of 13 to 17 and everything's happening, and it's first crush, first heartbreak, all that stuff. That there's that magic golden time in anyone's life when you can always pinpoint it and just go, oh right, I know that was your year. That's the year where all these songs mean so much.
Is there any particular artist or genre that you will never ever get bored of, that you're extremely that has really affected you?
That I'd never get bored of.
Doesn't have to be an artist, but any type of music that you just keep coming back to, that you have to listen to, whether it be classical or progressive rock or pop, or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it's not progressive rock, although I don't mind. We have had a couple of conversations about Genesis, but that's I could probably go for name about 6 songs, and you could probably name about 600. I don't know, just kind of well made. I suppose growing up in Essex, I was that sort of Essex soul boy kind of thing, that, Quincy Jones, James Ingram, 80s R&B. That's a kind of, if I want to go to my happy place, that's that comfort place. Anita Baker, all that stuff. That immediately.
I understand.
Luther Vandross. That's my. That puts me. I never get bored of that. I never get bored of a great kind of 80s R&B hit. And actually, I never get bored of really amazing soul, like proper soul music. So Aretha Franklin, that kind of thing, Stax, any of that stuff. I'll never get bored of that.
Level 42 have always been one of my biggest influences, actually. I think did you not work with them at all? They were on your list?
Level 42 were my band. They were the first gig that I ever saw when I was 11, 12, I think. And they played the Cliffs Pavilion in Southend. And my dad took me, and I went down the front and then realized that I shouldn't be down the front because I was bouncing without meaning to bounce. So I got taken back, but they were my band. I bought all my paper money I saved up. I bought all the 7 inches, 12 inches t-shirts, saw them live so many times. I loved them. I knew every lyric, every song, everything. They were my band through all my teenage years. And then incredibly, in the 90s, I was working on Take That, and the A&R person for Take That had just inherited Level 42, and he said, oh, you like them, don't you? They're making a new album. Do you want to go out and work on it? And I found myself on a ferry with Mike Lindup in his Citroen 2CV, going over and spending 2 weeks at Mark King's house. And it was all a bit bizarre, actually. It was all a bit, and the weird thing about that experience was it was at the time where somebody at the label had said, maybe the whole slap bass thing's a bit old fashioned. Maybe this album, we don't do it. And I thought, oh my God, that's it. I've finally got to work with my favorite band, and they're not going to let Mark do what he does. And the first song that we worked on was Forever Now, and it didn't have any slap bass on it. And then I think one night I was just like, oh, go on, just, and he just smashed it out, and it was amazing. So yeah, I was lucky enough to work with them. It was extraordinary. And Phil Gould was there as well, and he played. So it was a dream. I did half the record, and then the incredible Julian Mendelsohn did the rest, who is an absolute legend.
That must have been incredible. Yeah, to meet your idols is.
And they were great as well. I mean, Mark really took me under his wing, and he would, in the middle of the day, he'd sit me down in front of videos of, or sit me down in front of CDs of Return to Forever, and it was an education. I got completely educated. I came back knowing so much more than I did before I went away.
Oh, Chick Corea, you mean?
Chick Corea's band, yeah, and various
it's a great
things.
Album, that Return to Forever.
Yeah, just that band and Brecker Brothers, and various bits of brass stuff, and just all of his influences and what he wanted to try and get into the record. It was incredible.
Yeah, and there is so much incredible music out there. Talking of Chick Corea, I mean, I love Chick Corea. Just listen to stuff all the time. There is so much good music out there. There really, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and before, of course. But yeah, it's wonderful to be able to just listen to those classic albums, and just, especially now we've got such great headphones, not like we did back in the 80s or even the 70s, and to really hear the quality of those analog recordings. Really coming out now. You can really, really hear what it was all about. So much
definitely
more.
Yeah,
I'm rediscovering a lot of old classic albums now. It's fantastic. What about the future of music? What do you think is in store for us musicians? And regarding, we kind of spoke about that on the phone the other day about releasing, creating your own record company or publishing. Or now that it's a lot easier for the artists to release their own material. Do you see that morphing into something else in the near future? Because it is moving it's definitely moving forward from what it was, say, 10 years ago now.
I think it is.
What would you like the future to be, and what do you think it's going to be like in the next?
I think, for instance, if we're talking about, great musicianship, I think you can find greatness everywhere, and especially with young artists. I mean, there's an incredible artist called Jacob Collier who does all of that. He's kind of modern day Quincy, basically. He's
amazing. I heard him.
Yeah. And Jacob, if anyone is interested in stuff, Jacob posts breakdowns of all of his stuff, and he's such an incredible guy. So, but he's there's one of him. There's great singer songwriters. There's great music. It's just you're in a world where 40,000 tracks get uploaded to Spotify every single day. So it's very, very hard to find it. And you have to look a bit hard and work out and curate it. But I think it's easy. It's great that it's easy for people to release stuff and make it in their bedrooms and put it up. That's fantastic. It's very hard for them to get found. I wouldn't necessarily, a record label can help with that sometimes. I think in the case of someone like, Ed Sheeran, that has really, really helped push him to the kind of stratosphere. And there's obviously a lot of examples of like him and Sam Smith and Adele, and, they're really, really good. I think there's an element of that. I feel there's an element of an edit that needs to be done. I think when sort of a few years ago or 20 years ago, there wasn't that many records coming out, and there was also a bit of quality control involved. So I think if you're really, really good and you keep at it, it will come through. You just can't really sit around and wait to be discovered anymore, because even before the pandemic, record labels weren't going to gigs. They were relying on somebody in the office saying, oh, you should check this person out. And it's normally probably to do with what numbers they were getting on streaming, or what numbers they were getting on their socials. So, it's just a new way of working. And you just, you said this brilliantly the first time I met you, is that there's no point in fighting against it. It's happened. It's happening. So basically get on board and realize that, as you said, realize that these platforms are your shop window, and make sure that you put the best thing on them, and really have to put the work in to understand how you can connect with your audience and find your audience and find your tribe and find the people that love what you do, and be unique and be yourself, and don't try and imitate too many other people. And if you want to be inspired by someone, don't be inspired by someone that's just got a record out.
Yeah.
You know.
But there are artists who are so good who do release their own material who are
Yes.
getting absolutely nowhere. That is an issue, I think, that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be something needs to be done about that, I think, because it's all very well putting it out, releasing the material, but as you say, getting it to the right people, finding your tribe, etc., etc. Does it mean? I mean, we've discussed this before with other people in the past, but does it mean employing somebody who's good with social media? Does it mean employing a company to push it? You know, then you're getting back into that whole company vibe again. I'm always trying to figure out what I'm going through at the moment, is because I've got a vast amount of material that I am putting out, and it's different genres. It's not just my own commercial music, singing, etc., etc. I'm doing library music. I'm doing different genres, as you've heard, and I've got to try and get that out to the right places. And it seems to me at the moment the only option I have is to get it to the right people is by putting it under a label, under a genre: ambient music, pop music, rock music, whatever it is. But there has to be another level. I'm trying to figure out what that level is. I was wondering if you know where that level is hiding, or if it's there, how is it accessed? I think that is a very important point, especially for new artists who are trying to get out there.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's so easy to put something out in the world. There's a million services that will put your record up on all the streaming services. We know that's easy. They're very cheap and they do what they do. They don't necessarily provide you with everything else that you might need. So I think investing, you could make a record for not much money. You can put a record out for not much money, but you can't necessarily promote it for not much money. So I do think that people have to understand that there has to be some element of investment. And if you have whatever investment you have, I think as a new artist, invest it in some sort of digital PR, digital marketing. There's a company that we've spoken about before called Cyber PR, who give great tips. They're free tips. They do a really good podcast. They do a podcast called Spotify or Die, which I recommend anyone listens to, because it will show you how much you can do yourself just on your Spotify artist page by tagging your songs and doing your playlists and things like that. But I don't think you have to be signed to a record label. I think you can be your own record label, but there's going to be an element of the marketing side where you need to find someone who all they do every day is say to you, okay, today you need to post this, do that, do that, do that. And they're just in charge of marketing you. And they're on all the platforms, and they're going across it. They're finding your audience. They're cross-collateralizing your audience. That's the way of sort of cutting through. And I think for younger artists, the other thing, everyone seems to think that it all happens overnight. So when there's a new artist that comes on the scene, everyone goes, "Oh wow, they've never heard them before. They must be new." They very rarely are. They've been doing it for 6 years usually. There's one of my favorite new artist and has been for the last 3 years is a girl called Maisie Peters, who is the best young songwriter that I know, and it is signed but has been putting records out for 4 or 5 years. And she started to I think she had a #1 on iTunes a couple of weeks ago because all of her fans went out and bought it, but the following day it was not a #1 on iTunes. But she's gone from small gigs to bigger gigs. When she comes back, she'll be in bigger gigs. Give it another year and she'll be huge. But it's not for the faint-hearted, this industry, and you shouldn't expect things to happen overnight.
Sure.
And also, I think, and you're testament to this, it's hard work, and 10% of what you do is going to be the fun stuff when you're making music. 90% of what you do is going to be the other stuff when you're trying to find an audience for it.
And because we're doing what we enjoy doing, it doesn't feel like work. We can just keep working hour after hour and not get bored of it.
No, you won't get bored of making it. But I think I'm a big fan of play to your strengths. And I think if you're an artist a young artist that's a great singer and a great songwriter, and social media does your head in, then try and find a way of getting some investment. I'm talking to hundreds, not thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
And finding a digital marketing team. Don't automatically go to a TuneCore. Have a look around at the other distributors of what they can do, and see what add-ons they will deliver as part of your package, and maybe get someone else to run your digital campaign for you.
Do you think it's very important for artists to have managers these days, or are we our own management team?
I think it's important to have someone looking after you. I don't necessarily know if it needs to be a manager. I think it's good to have a good lawyer. I think it's good to have someone that's a buffer between you and the person that's asking you to do something, because there's a point where money's going to come up and you never want to be the person that's negotiating your own fee. I think managers, it kind of depends who they are. I always get worried when I hear stories of kind of younger artists coming up and a manager sort of says, "Oh, I'm going to take over," and someone signs to someone way too quickly, unless that person's got an incredible track record, and they've done it before. That's great, but it's sort of about who you know. I think some managers bring some expertise with them, which is great. Some bring a good phone book, but I think my advice would be for anyone looking at management, find the artists that you like and that do a similar thing to you, and try and adhere to that kind of go approach their management and see if they would be interested, rather than having someone come along and taking you on when you're not necessarily sure what they do.
Right. That's a great piece of advice for anyone watching this. And Steve, you're involved with the 80s classic shows.
Yes.
Together. Do you want to speak a little bit about what's happening with that? And explain what has happened and what's already been performed, and what you're hoping to put on in the coming months.
Sure. So my love of 80s, and an orchestral arranger, Cliff Masterson, I've worked with for nearly 20 years on everything that all my productions, and we work together. We did have a couple of shows that were more dance anthems, like 90s house dance anthems going back to my old school days. And then we thought we would try one with 80s, but we knew it had been done before, but we didn't think it had been done with an orchestra and the original artists. So in 2019, we did the first show, which was at Millennium Square in Leeds, where we have another show as well as an outdoor show. And it was exactly that. It was the biggest hits for that show was Jimmy Somerville, Howard Jones, Nick Kershaw, Carol Decker, Johnny Hates Jazz, with a 75-piece symphony orchestra. And the other trick to it is, I found doing those big orchestral shows, it's always troublesome when you've got then a live band in there, because it bleeds down all of the microphones. A bit techie, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, and then I also love the sound of those 80s records. So I wanted to make sure that anything that wasn't orchestra was electronic, because all of the artists we worked with were electronic. And I couldn't think of anything worse than a Howard Jones song, with a pub acoustic snare on it. So it had to be. So I meticulously went and recreated the programmed stuff to go along with the orchestra, and it went really well, and it was wonderful. We were supposed to do it again last year. Obviously, we didn't. We hope we're doing it again this year in July with Jimmy and Belinda Carlisle, and there's a whole bunch of other people on that gig, and we've just recently recorded studio versions of those songs, which we're going to sort of turn up on streaming over the next 6 to 9 months, I think. So it's very exciting. We were in Leeds, and we were at the Leeds Town Hall, which they made into a makeshift studio with the fabulous Opera North Orchestra, who do that show with us. And it's really wonderful. And again, it's getting under the hood of those incredible songs, and the ones that we aren't able to do with the original artists. We have incredible singers that we work with, so we're able to do things like Africa by Toto,
right.
in a fully symphonic arrangement.
Yeah.
So it's just kids in a candy shop, isn't it?
That's without a band, just the orchestra.
So orchestra and programming. So
Right.
yeah, I'd program. We did a bit of live recording on that actually, because obviously it's Toto. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of no mean feat, the programming, the kind of the drums and the bass on some of that stuff. But again, I'm a stickler for sounds.
Yeah.
So it's like I went back and found I think it was a copy of, well, someone will definitely correct me, but it was either a Matrix or a JP8 or something to get the brass for Africa.
Yeah, I actually play that song. I play Africa in my sets, acoustic version of it, including the song.
It works nicely acoustic, doesn't it?
It's great. It's nice. Yeah, it's a very simple arrangement, as you know.
Yeah.
But if you break it down,
it is. Do you do the solo in the middle?
I do the solo note for note, and I remember
it's tough.
It is tough, but I was determined one day to learn it. I thought that sounds really hard. If you break it down, it's just a scale.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know this because Cliff scored it for someone to play on marimba. So try doing it with sticks.
Yeah.
And they did. They absolutely did. They nailed it. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was when I was going back in the day when I was on tour with a Flock of Seagulls. I had a Jupiter 8 on stage, a DX7, a Juno 60, those three keyboards, and DX7 had a marimba on it. So Toto recorded it pre DX7 marimba time, pre FM tone generating synthesis was around. But now you can do it exactly, of course.
Oh no, yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. But I mean, I love what you've just said there about like the three core synths that pretty much was the staple of any electronic band of the 80s. If you had those synths, and Flock of Seagulls made incredible sounding records, but again, you were limited by what synths you had and you just made it work.
Yeah.
And, to be able to recreate something like I Ran live in, back then, it must have been quite a feat, I would have thought.
Three notes. They were basically octaves. I was on stage. And I ran. And then the major chord. That was it.
But it had to be the right sound. It's a bit like,
sound. Yeah, it was the Jupiter.
Like when you go and see, I went to see Human League a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely. I mean, it was the record. I mean, it was genius. It just, you can't.
Now, there are some sounds. There are some beauties in the Human League record.
Well,
there are some incredible sounds.
I mean, you talk about, I never forget to this day, and it was obvious that we were going to get onto this subject of synths, but I mean,
we have to.
Everyone always asks me about life-changing records, and I was probably 11 years old, and I got my copy of Dare home by the Human League, and I remember just playing it and just sitting there going, I don't know how this has happened. I don't know what these sounds are. I don't know who's made it. But this is the most incredible thing I've heard in my life. And still to this day, you can sit there and listen to Dare and go, I don't really understand how they did that, but it's genius.
Right. Yeah. Well, those old synths were just fantastic. When the first keyboard I had was a Juno 60.
Yeah.
Back in whenever it was, 80 or something, 1980, 81, when it first came out. And I learned ADSR then. Attack, decay, sustain, release, how to use those switches, which was a blessing because I get it now. And it's just great to be able to control those sounds with attack and the decay and the sustain and release and all that, and of course adjusting all the LFOs and the oscillators and just playing around with those sounds and creating those wonderful sounds was amazing. But those synthesizers were just, the Jupiter 8 is like Veermoth, massive. And still to this day, originals are going for £8,000-10,000 now. Some of them even. I mean, it's ridiculous, But those sounds, those bands like the Human League, etc., Depeche Mode, all the electronic bands, they really embraced that technology then, and it was still really in its infancy actually at that time. You had those little drum machines. I mean, I had an Electro Harmonics pedal for my guitar. Pedal board, which was actually a drum machine. When I say drum machine, it was playing little blips like boom, boom, beep, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
That was it. And you could just turn the tempo. You couldn't even control the tempo. You just have to guess what the tempo was. I never used it, so I sold it. I stuck it on eBay for about 400 quid. I think I got for it. It wasn't, and it wasn't worth anything for me to me. But all those little there was the Roland, the TR-808s, of course, the classic, but the silver ones. I always remember the silver drum machines, the 505, I think it was, the smaller ones, which had that kind of metallic sort of feel to it. More of the early Depeche Mode style.
Yeah.
They're still fantastic. They really are. They just bring back those incredible memories of wonderful songs, and it's all coming back to a certain extent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear it creeping in now. It's coming back with some of the productions. There was actually a band I heard on radio too, a track called Metronomy.
Okay.
I don't know if you know it. Metronomy, I think it was.
Okay.
I thought it was some retro band from the early 80s, and it was just been released. It was incredible. It really was.
I have a theory about this, and my theory is that, if you grew up if you were a kid in the 70s, the 60s sounded old fashioned, and the 70s, by the time you got to if you were a teenager in the 80s, the 70s sounded a bit old fashioned, apart from Bowie, who was always in fashion.
Yeah.
The 70s sort of sounded, and a bit of disco. But then as soon as electronic music started to be made in the 80s, it didn't necessarily sound as old fashioned. So I think if you listen to, for instance, there's the last couple of albums that were out by Dua Lipa or The Weeknd.
Yeah.
It's very much referencing the 80s. So if you then go back,
especially the cover as well.
Yeah, yeah. But if you go and, this is what I love about Spotify is, if you've got a 18-year-old kid that's listening to the Weeknd single, and then all of a sudden they listen to Take On Me by Aha, it isn't going to seem old fashioned because it's going to seem new. So that whole thing about, the revolution of, not wanting to listen to what your parents listen to because it sounds old. The 80s doesn't necessarily sound old because it was made electronically, and it's still being made electronically.
Yeah.
So, I think that's, and I think, one of my friends was teaching a bunch of students, kind of younger students, and I think they were reasonably young. I don't know, 13, 14, something. And I think he played them about 3 tracks from Thriller and the ones that weren't the big hits, and it just blew their minds. And it's like, because they thought, well, this is the most, this could have been produced now. So that's my theory, is the fact that, once you hit electronic music, it almost says nothing's really dated anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I think the other thing I was going to say, just to sort of give you props as well, is the fact that what people don't really understand is not only when you're doing that stuff with the keyboards that you were doing in the 80s, how to keep those things in time with each other was the trick. Because those early sync boxes, that was not the easiest thing to do, to actually kind of keep all the machines talking to each other.
Yeah, well, live.
That's what I mean. How did you do that live? Well, because I know a lot of people just were running like Revoxes and stuff.
Well, I'll tell you how we did it. And it was, it makes me laugh because I've got pictures of me on stage with this stuff. We had a VHS tape machine on top of the keyboard.
Yeah.
On a shelf above the Juno 6.
I've seen pictures of that. I thought that was just for show.
No, it was a VHS tape, a machine, which was running some backing tracks, bits and pieces that we couldn't reproduce, effects, which is
on VHS.
On VHS. So I had to press it, and it would start, and that was my cue. I had to listen to it. So it was my job to keep everyone in time with that. And
so you had a click or something, or just a drum machine, I guess.
I was starting every track,
right?
with stop, start, stop, start, and it wasn't a click. It was just it would start like a click, but it would it was I had to start it off every night. Below that, there was a Betamax machine. I don't know why they didn't have another VHS. There was a Betamax machine, as a backup. Luckily, I never had to use that, but it was always there as a backup. And I could never understand didn't bother trying to figure out how to. I was just told, do this and do that. That's what you have to do. And I thought, all right, fine. They just told me to, if that breaks down, you press that button and it'll be synchronized. Don't
So
know
it
how
was just
works.
like a 2-track version of everything that couldn't be achieved live. So I mean, because that's so it's very much similar to what, like when people were Depeche and people were going on with a Revox, or Yazoo were going on with a Revox. It's just something to kind of do the stuff that you can't do live.
Well, I think VHS was more advanced than Revox at that point. It was the modern technology, don't forget.
Yeah.
So
you were running stems.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
that is doing. Fascinating.
Yeah. And
I've never ever heard of anyone doing it on a VHS. And a VHS with a Betamax backup. That is brilliant.
Betamax backup. So 2 machines, and I've got pictures of it somewhere.
And it looked cool as well, because it looked very 80s and very new, new synth. And
yeah, it was great. It worked fine. It was absolutely fine. I mean,
sorry, I know. I was always. I love those stories about how people used to keep stuff in time in the 80s. So
yeah. I mean, to be fair, we played a lot of stuff live anyway. We didn't need a lot, but some of the tracks they needed. I think Iran was one that had a lot of effects on it. It was, it was very important. The band just got a Grammy, not long before then, so we couldn't screw that one up.
No,
and there was a lot of, there was a lot on my head because I was a new boy on the block there. I was brought in to do all the keyboards, because Mike Score then didn't want to play the keyboards and play live, because when they were becoming bigger and bigger, he was playing keyboards and he just couldn't do it because these shows were getting huge. So they wanted to do a bigger tour and bring another keyboard player. So they brought me in. They wanted someone that could sing and play. So I had a little Nady mic on me, little Nady microphone. Do you remember those Nady mics? And that was it. Off I went.
Brilliant.
I went merry way on the stage, and it was great. But we did play a lot of the stuff live, and there was a lot of energy on that stage. Actually, I must say it was really, really good. But yeah, I have very fond memories of that tour. Very fond memories.
I bet.
It was like a dream, actually. Well, the album was called Dream Come True, so that was the last time
there you go.
they released.
It was.
And it was a dream come true. I was just turned 21 when I ended up, right in the deep end of touring with a big band like that in America.
Brilliant.
That was great. Well, what can I say, Steve? It's been a fascinating hour or so chatting with you. It's been really, really great. Really enjoyed it, and learned a lot of wonderful things about the business from you. And I could sit here all day and talk to you about music. I'm sure we'll continue some other time.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you want to talk about regarding what you're doing now?
No, this is great. It's a lot. I mean, we've said that, I think the thing is, musicians just love talking about, music stuff and gear. And, I think the one thing that, when I don't know when this is going to go out, but I mean, just so everyone knows, we're about 2 days away from when the pub gardens open. So I think, we're very much looking forward to, I think you and myself and Mr. James Nesbitt will be sitting in some pub garden somewhere talking about guitar pedals and sync things and keyboards. Yes. And I think, it's the one thing that, musicians need other musicians to, because nobody else is going to understand it. No one's partners understand it. Anyone understand it. But, we love a good nerdy chat about, tech and gear. And we're the only ones that can tolerate each other doing it. So it'd be nice to do it in the sunshine in person soon.
And there's always something new to learn about this stuff, isn't there? We never get bored of it.
No. Well, I think studio people and musicians, we're used to being, in this world. And, it's just, I never, ever get tired of, if I hear a record that one of my friends has made, I love just calling them up saying, how did you do that? Every day is a school day. This industry isn't a computer game that you can complete. You and I are of a certain age, and I've learned new things today. You've learned new things today. Yeah. We'll continually learn new things and be fascinated by it.
Absolutely. And long may it continue.
Oh, absolutely.
And well, thanks ever so much for finding the time to do this. And this will be going out very, very shortly.
Okay, wicked. Well, listen, thanks for asking me, Chris. It's been lovely to get to know you for a mutual friend in the last couple of months. And we'll carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there? I'll put some links down to your website or
Oh
anything
yeah,
else.
that'd be amazing. Yeah, thanks very
Yeah,
much. Yeah, there's a bunch of, well, God willing, there's a bunch of shows this year. There's the 80s classical, should be in July. I've got a big Westlife show at hopefully at Wembley Stadium in August. I've got Steps going back out late October. And there's a couple of my classical shows, Lush Classical and various orchestral shows that are going to be happening in Ireland. So, I mean, the plan is to go ahead with all of these things, God willing. And, I hope to be there and be back out and looking at an audience to figure out if we've got it right or not.
excellent. Well, I'll put your website down or any other links.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so
below
much.
in the
It's very
comments-
kind. Yeah.
comments below, and people can check out everything else that they need to check out. We'll get in touch
Brilliant.
with you. That'd
Thank
be
you so
fantastic.
much. Brilliant.
And Steve, thanks a lot. And
No worries.
look forward to seeing you, meeting you, and having a drink and talking about keyboards and music. And long may it continue, and then keep music alive. And let's get out there and get those audiences and bums on seats and get the musicians up on stage again. That's what we need.
Absolutely, that's it. I'm all about that. I want musicians on stage. I want techies. I want crew. I just, the last thing I'll say is that we were lucky enough to do a show last year, and it was the first time I'd been back in a venue for 6 months, and one of my monitor engineers was bending over and his jeans were riding underneath the crack of his arse, and I nearly burst into tears because I was so pleased to see that sight. So we've all taken for granted all this stuff for all this time. So the next time you get back, get those boys and girls back backline and doing their jobs, and they've really, really suffered. They've had the toughest out of everyone. So getting them back working is the priority for us all, I think.
Absolutely, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely, totally. So bring it on, and let's get rid of this COVID and kick it out into the universe, away from the Earth.
Yeah.
And let's get back on the road again.
Big time.
Steve, thanks a lot. And
no worries, thanks.
All the best, and thanks again.
No worries.
Cheers.